A royal wedding where the bride and groom share the same parents. That's not just a scandal. That's how Egypt built an empire. Picture this, you're standing beneath towering marble columns, golden light pouring through silk banners, thousands of people cheering from balconies draped in crimson and gold flowers scattering across polished stone floors, and the scent of frankincense filling the air. The bride glides forward in a gown of shimmering golden silk, her dark hair woven with pearls and lotus blossoms, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar, a man draped in royal purple robes, handsome, powerful, the Pharaoh of Egypt. The crowd holds its breath, caught between awe and ecstasy. And then, as the priest raises his hands to bless the union, the Pharaoh leans forward and kisses his bride. Full lips, tender touch, and in that moment you realize you've just witnessed a brother kissing his sister. Full siblings. Same father, same mother, same blood, same genes. This isn't some bizarre one-off footnote in the dusty scrolls of ancient history. This was official royal policy of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the rulers of ancient Egypt, for nearly 300 years. And here's what makes it even more mind-bending: it actually worked. Until it spectacularly didn't. Because what began as a clever political maneuver to keep power locked tight within one royal bloodline would eventually mutate into a genetic time bomb and ignite the most twisted royal scandals the world has ever known, a dynasty devouring itself from within. In this story, you're going to discover how the Ptolemaic dynasty, famous for building the mighty library of Alexandria and producing Cleopatra, the most famous queen in history, also engineered one of the biggest family dramas humanity has ever witnessed, fusing Egyptian grandeur with Greek ambition and leaving behind a legacy of power, corruption, and incest that still fascinates the world today. Because the truth is, the patterns that destroyed ancient Egypt's royal family are the same forces shaping corporate boardrooms, political dynasties, and even modern empires right now. So buckle up, because this isn't just ancient history. This is the story of how the obsession with purity, isolation, and absolute power created a kingdom that rose higher than any empire in the ancient Mediterranean and then collapsed under the weight of its own royal secrets. This is the true story of Egyptian incest, Cleopatra's bloody legacy, and how the Ptolemaic dynasty became history's most dramatic, cautionary tale. Picture the ancient world in chaos, trembling beneath the weight of a single man's death. The year is 323 BCE. Alexander the Great, the unstoppable conqueror who carved his empire from Greece to India, the man who believed he was invincible, half god, half human, has just died at the age of 32. And as his body lies cooling in a suffocating palace chamber in Babylon, draped in silk and surrounded by weeping courtiers, the entire world holds its breath. Incense chokes the air. Bronze lamps flicker shadows across terrified faces. Because here's the terrifying truth: Alexander left no heir, no written will, no chosen successor. One minute, the entire known world was unified under a single brilliant mind. The next, it's a fragmented mosaic with every general who ever rode beside him, now snarling at each other like starving wolves circling the throne. Picture them, the greatest military leaders of the age, men who've marched across burning deserts and stormed the walls of Persian cities, now standing around a dying man's bed, each calculating how to snatch a piece of an empire so vast it stretched across 3 continents. And none of them trust each other for a single heartbeat. Because while Alexander's corpse grows colder, his empire begins decomposing even faster than his flesh. This moment right here in this palace, heavy with the scent of decay and betrayal, is the genesis of a series of power plays that would shape the next 300 years of history. And out of all these legendary generals, Cassander, Seleucus, Antigonus, Lysimachus, there stands one man who seems almost insignificant. He's not the strongest, not the most flamboyant, not the most celebrated. His name is Ptolemy Tommy for short in the chronicles of twisted royal scandals. And while the others lock horns over who will become the next Alexander, Tommy is quietly looking south, towards Egypt. Think about this: while everyone else is obsessed with ruling the entire Macedonian Empire, Tommy understands a fundamental truth about power, a truth that echoes in corporate boardrooms and political dynasties to this day. You don't need the whole pie, you just need the richest slice. Egypt in 323 BCE is that slice. Why Egypt? Because where other lands rely on fragile supply lines and armies to guard endless borders, Egypt has the Sahara Desert as a natural fortress. Where other kingdoms scrape for trade, Egypt has the Nile River, a living conveyor belt of grain and gold, nature's money-printing machine. And above all, Egypt holds Alexandria, the brand new city, founded by Alexander himself, designed to become the center of the world, a city destined to be the Manhattan of the ancient Mediterranean. Tommy sees something the others don't. He doesn't need to become the next Alexander. He just needs to own the piece of the empire that matters most. And then he makes a move so audacious, it would become one of history's greatest power grabs and set the stage for the Ptolemaic dynasty's rise to absolute control. He steals Alexander's body. Let that sink in. This wasn't some petty grave robbery. In the ancient world, whoever possessed the remains of a divine king held the keys to legitimacy, political power, and spiritual authority. And Tommy knew that if he could keep Alexander's body in Egypt, he wouldn't just be a satrap. He'd be the guardian of Alexander's legacy. Imagine it, the golden funeral carriage shimmering beneath the desert sun, rolling toward Macedonia with thousands of soldiers in procession. Then suddenly, Tommy and his troops intercept it and proclaim, "Sorry, this is staying in Egypt." It sounds insane, right? But this was political brilliance of the highest order. By seizing Alexander's body, Tommy wasn't just laying claim to a dead man's bones. He was claiming the right to shape the future of civilization itself. He builds Alexander's tomb in the heart of Alexandria, ensuring that any king, merchant, or philosopher who wants to pay homage to the great conqueror must come to Egypt and, more importantly, must bow to Tommy's authority. This isn't mere tourism. This is political pilgrimage. And it works. Because Tommy understands something crucial to rule Egypt. For more than just a few years, he can't simply be another Macedonian warlord. He has to become something far more dangerous, a pharaoh who's both Egyptian and Greek. And that's where the real transformation begins, because what Tommy builds in Alexandria will become the glittering jewel of the ancient world. But as you're about to see, even the most brilliant power moves come with shadows waiting just beyond the light. Because while Tommy might have secured his grip on Egypt, there's one question he hasn't answered yet. A question that will eventually give birth to centuries of incest, unimaginable royal scandals, and the most dramatic dynasty collapse the world has ever seen, who inherits all this power when he's gone. Imagine the audacity of one man seizing the corpse of history's greatest conqueror to build his own legend. Because that's precisely what Tommy Ptolemy I did. This wasn't simply stealing a dead king's body, it was rewriting the rules of power in the ancient world. Picture the scene: Alexander's funeral procession gliding across blazing deserts under an ocean of fluttering banners, soldiers clad in polished bronze escorting a golden coffin that glows like captured sunlight. Trumpets blare, drums thunder, thousands of warriors march in synchronized steps, all believing they're carrying the remains of a demigod home to Macedonia. And then suddenly, out of the shimmering heat haze comes Tommy with his army blocking the road. Swords flash, shields clatter, and Tommy, with absolute calm, announces that the body of Alexander is staying in Egypt. It sounds like madness, but it's political genius. Because in the ancient world, whoever held a king's body held legitimacy itself. The corpse wasn't just a hunk of royal meat. It was a divine talisman, the physical embodiment of an entire empire's loyalty. By taking Alexander's body and building a majestic tomb in Alexandria, Tommy didn't just crown himself pharaoh. He crowned himself as the guardian of Alexander's immortal legacy. Think about the viral power of that move, a single calculated theft that turned a mere satrap into a kingmaker and transformed Alexandria into the spiritual and political capital of the Mediterranean. Every general, every merchant, every foreign dignitary who wanted to pay homage to Alexander now had to come to Egypt, had to pass beneath statues of Tommy's own likeness, had to kneel before the man who held the key to the conqueror's grave. This wasn't tourism. This was political pilgrimage, a masterstroke of psychological warfare. And Ptolemy knew that to truly cement his rule, he couldn't just be a foreign warlord in Egyptian eyes. He had to become something entirely new, a ruler who was both Greek and Egyptian, a hybrid sovereign straddling two worlds. So he did something revolutionary. He put on Egyptian ceremonial robes, appearing in sacred rituals like a true pharaoh, while continuing to speak Greek in court and surround himself with scholars, artists, and mathematicians from across the Hellenistic world. He worshipped Egyptian gods, building temples that towered like mountains. Yet he also hosted Greek philosophers debating the secrets of the cosmos. Alexandria blossomed into the Manhattan of the ancient world, a city pulsing with money, knowledge, and exotic trade. Picture it, the great library of Alexandria bursting with scrolls from every known civilization, becoming the Silicon Valley of its age, where mathematicians like Euclid, scientists like Eratosthenes, and inventors like Archimedes would unlock secrets that would shape human history. Ships from India, Persia, Greece, and Rome crowded Alexandria's harbor, their sails bright as butterfly wings, carrying silk, spices, gold, and secrets. Wealth poured into the city like an endless river. Under Ptolemy's rule, Egypt was no longer a mere province of a crumbling empire. It was a superpower in its own right, richer than any other kingdom on earth, stronger than any fleet in the Mediterranean, and glittering with cultural prestige. And the brilliance of Ptolemy's hybrid rule set the stage for the Ptolemaic dynasty to reign supreme for centuries. But, and here's the kicker, there was still one problem even Ptolemy couldn't solve. The ultimate question that haunted every throne, every empire, every royal bloodline in history: who would inherit all this unimaginable power when he was gone? Because Ptolemy wasn't content with being pharaoh for a few decades. He wanted to build a dynasty that would last forever. But multiple wives meant multiple sons, and multiple sons meant rival claims, divided loyalties, and the specter of civil war. Throughout history, empires haven't fallen because of external enemies as much as they've crumbled from the inside out. Brother killing brother, generals choosing sides, nations splintering into pieces. Ptolemy knew this. He knew the dynasty would need a solution, a system so perfect it would keep power locked tight within the royal family for generations to come. And in his search for that solution, Ptolemy planted a seed that would grow into one of the most twisted, dangerous, and ultimately tragic royal strategies the world has ever witnessed, a solution that would give birth to incestuous marriages, genetic time bombs, and scandals so explosive that they'd echo through history all the way to Cleopatra herself. And that's exactly where we're heading next, because the moment Ptolemy dies, his children and their children are about to turn Egypt into the stage for the greatest royal drama ever told. Ptolemy's empire sparkled like a jewel under the desert sun. But even as Alexandria rose to become the crown of the ancient world, a silent storm was already gathering behind its gleaming marble walls. Because while Ptolemy had pulled off the greatest political heist in history by stealing Alexander's body and transforming Egypt into a cosmopolitan powerhouse, there was still one shadow he couldn't outrun, a question as lethal as any invading army who would inherit all of this when he was gone. Think about it. Ptolemy had successfully fused Egyptian and Greek cultures into a single dazzling civilization. He wore Egyptian regalia, performed sacred rituals like a living god, and stood before the priests of Isis as pharaoh. But in his private chambers and public court, he spoke Greek, debated philosophy, and cultivated an intellectual elite from Athens to Persia. Alexandria wasn't just a city, it was the Silicon Valley and Wall Street of the ancient Mediterranean rolled into one. The Library of Alexandria stood as the beating heart of this hybrid empire, housing every scroll of knowledge ever written, from mathematical equations that would define geometry to maps that charted the farthest reaches of the known world. Ships filled with spices, silk, gold, and secrets flowed into the city's massive harbor, making Egypt richer than any kingdom on earth. Merchants from 3 continents hustled through Alexandria's streets, their voices a chorus of dozens of languages. Scholars scribbled new ideas by lamplight, while priests burned incense to gods older than time itself. Under Ptolemy's rule, the Ptolemaic dynasty became not just a political power, but the cultural superpower of the entire Mediterranean. But here's the cruel paradox that history loves to serve up: the more dazzling the empire, the more devastating its potential fall. And Ptolemy knew that if he died without securing a rock-solid succession plan, all this glittering wealth and power would explode into chaos. The problem was simple and terrifying. Ptolemy had multiple wives. Multiple wives meant multiple sons. And multiple sons meant multiple claims to the throne, a recipe for civil war written 1,000 times over in the bloody pages of history. He'd seen what happened in other kingdoms when royal brothers turned on each other, plunging empires into generations of violence. Ptolemy refused to let Egypt become just another casualty of royal ego and fratricide. He wanted to lock power inside the royal bloodline so tightly that no one outside the family could touch it. And that's where the idea was born, a solution that seemed perfect on paper, a plan that would go down in history as both brilliant and catastrophically disastrous royal incest. Because why risk bringing foreign blood and foreign claims into the family when you could keep the throne pure by marrying brother to sister, father to daughter, uncle to niece? To Ptolemy and his advisors, it wasn't just about preserving bloodlines. It was a political firewall, a way to ensure that no new in-laws, no powerful external families could slip into the royal circle and fracture Egypt's unity from within. Incest became not just tolerated but institutionalized. It was written into policy, celebrated in temples, and even carved into coins where kings and queens appeared side by side as both siblings and spouses. And it worked, at least at first. Ptolemy's gamble to create a royal family that was both Greek and Egyptian gave rise to the Ptolemaic dynasty's golden age. Wealth flooded the kingdom. Military power expanded. Alexandria glittered as the cultural capital of the world. But what no one in Ptolemy's court could predict was the hidden cost lurking beneath this seemingly perfect strategy. Because while incest might keep power consolidated, it also keeps genetic defects consolidated. And like a time bomb ticking inside the royal bloodline, each generation shuffled the same deck of genes, stacking the odds higher and higher for catastrophe. The first few sibling marriages seemed to defy nature, producing brilliant rulers like Ptolemy II, the so-called sister lover, and his equally formidable sister wife, Arsinoe II. But their brilliance wasn't the rule, it was the exception. Future generations would try to copy the pattern, believing incest alone was the secret to stable rule, without realizing that genius can't be inherited as reliably as blood. And that tragic misunderstanding was about to set the entire dynasty on a path toward spectacular implosion. Because next we're stepping into the reign of Ptolemy the sister lover, a ruler whose choices would crystallize incest as official state policy, deliver Egypt into its golden age, and unknowingly plant the seeds of the dynasty's doom. And so the stage was set for one of the boldest and ultimately most dangerous social experiments in human history. Enter Ptolemy the sister lover, known to historians as Ptolemy II. The nickname alone should tell you everything you need to know about how far the Ptolemaic dynasty was willing to go to protect their grip on Egypt. Picture the moment, it's 275 BCE, the marble halls of Alexandria echoing with the hush of anticipation. Ptolemy the sister lover stands at the center of the royal court, eyes fixed not on some foreign princess or distant royal alliance, but on a woman who shares his blood, his lineage, and his claim to the throne, his sister Arsinoe II. And the decision he makes in that shimmering palace will define the next 2.5 centuries of Egyptian history. Initially, Ptolemy was married to Arsinoe I, a noble woman from Thrace, a match meant to cement political alliances and secure military strength. But quickly he realized the danger. Marrying outside the royal bloodline meant inviting foreign claims into Egypt's corridors of power. It meant children whose loyalties might be torn between two kingdoms. It meant in-laws whispering secrets and plotting coups. Ptolemy, driven by the same ruthless clarity that had made his father steal Alexander's body, decided to eliminate the threat at its root. He divorced Arsinoe. I cast her aside like an unwanted political pawn and turned his gaze inward to his sister. Marrying Arsinoe II wasn't merely an act of incest. It was a calculated move to consolidate power and broadcast to the world that Egypt's throne was for the Ptolemies and the Ptolemies alone. And the results astonishingly seemed to justify his gamble. Because Arsinoe II was no mere ornament on the arm of a king. She was a political powerhouse in her own right, a woman who had already worn a crown as Queen of Thrace, who understood the art of diplomacy, military strategy, and governance better than most men in her court. Together, Tommy the sister-lover and Arsinoe II forged what historians have called the Jewel Monarchy, a royal partnership so unified, so dazzling, that Egypt rocketed to the height of its power. Coins were struck bearing their portraits side by side, not simply as king and queen, but as divine siblings and spouses. Temples across Egypt celebrated them as living gods. They presided over an age when the Ptolemaic dynasty's treasury overflowed with silver and gold. The Library of Alexandria reached unprecedented glory, its shelves groaning under the weight of knowledge from every corner of the known world. Scientists, philosophers, and poets flooded into Egypt, drawn like moths to the brilliance of the Ptolemaic court. Egyptian incense perfumed the air of Roman banquets, and the ships of Alexandria's navy dominated the Mediterranean seas, ensuring the dynasty's economic and military supremacy. This was the golden age of the Ptolemies, a moment when Egypt wasn't merely surviving the post-Alexander chaos, but ruling over a cultural and political empire that rivaled anything Rome would build. And yet lurking beneath all this magnificence was a truth as lethal as any dagger in the dark. Because Tommy and Arsinoe's reign worked not simply because they were siblings, but because they were exceptional individuals. She was brilliant, charismatic, ruthless when necessary. He was a shrewd strategist who understood both Greek elegance and Egyptian divinity. Their union produced political stability not because of incest itself, but because they were uniquely suited to rule. And that, tragically, is the part future generations would fail to understand. Instead of recognizing that Tommy and Arsinoe were rare figures whose personal talents carried the dynasty to its zenith, their descendants would look at the surface, the sibling marriage, and assume it was a magic formula for everlasting power. Every time a crisis loomed over Egypt, future Ptolemies would return to the same solution: marry closer within the family. Keep the blood pure. Keep the throne secure. But nature doesn't play by royal rules. Each generation would shuffle the same limited genetic deck, drawing worse hands with each reshuffle. And as you're about to see, the very practice that forged Egypt's golden age, under Tommy the sister-lover, would become the ticking genetic time bomb that would explode the dynasty from within. Because what's coming next is the slow but devastating revelation that incest, far from being a political cure, all would leave Egypt ruled by kings and queens so mentally and physically diminished that the world's greatest empire would begin to crumble into chaos, scandal, and finally tragic oblivion. But here's the thing about formulas: they only work until they don't. Because while Tommy the sister-lover and Arsinoe II built a shimmering golden age atop their sibling marriage, no one in the Ptolemaic court realized they were also planting the seeds of their own destruction, a genetic time bomb ticking away in the shadows. Let's break this down like a modern science channel would, because the biology is as gripping as the scandal. Think of a gene pool like a deck of cards. Every time you marry someone outside your family, you're adding fresh cards to the deck. New traits, new strengths, new combinations that make your offspring more resilient and adaptable. But every time you marry a sibling, you're just reshuffling the same deck of cards over and over again. The first time you might get lucky and draw a royal flush, two brilliant rulers like Tommy and Arsinoe, whose talents carried Egypt to unimaginable heights. But keep reshuffling that same limited deck generation after generation, and the odds start stacking against you. Bad cards, the recessive genetic defects lurking unseen in every human lineage, begin to surface. And in the Ptolemaic dynasty, those bad cards would eventually appear in the most public, catastrophic ways possible. For a while, though, the incest strategy seemed bulletproof. Tommy and Arsinoe's reign was so spectacular that it became royal gospel sibling marriage equals political stability equals unstoppable power. The priests endorsed it. The people accepted it. Coins were minted with brother and sister crowned as living gods. And the dynasty clung to that formula as if it were divine law. But what they didn't understand was that incest doesn't just concentrate power. It also concentrates genetic flaws: hemophilia, epilepsy, physical deformities, cognitive impairments. These weren't medieval curses or divine punishments. They were biological inevitabilities, waiting for enough shuffles of the same genes. And while the Ptolemies thought they were preserving the purity of their divine bloodline, they were actually ensuring that each new heir would have fewer genetic resources to resist disease, mental instability, and sheer bad luck. For a couple generations, they kept getting lucky. The dynasty's children were born strong enough, clever enough, ruthless enough to keep the empire stable. But luck has an expiration date. And as we move further into the Ptolemaic lineage, the warning signs begin to flash like lightning on the horizon. The later Ptolemies inherited not just thrones and crowns, but a shrinking pool of genetic possibilities. They began showing subtle cracks, rulers who lacked charisma, who were indecisive, who preferred indulgence and luxury to the hard work of governing. A slow corrosion crept into the royal bloodline, invisible at first but growing more impossible to ignore with each generation. And here's the real tragedy: the Ptolemies couldn't see the connection between their fading strength and their family marriages. Instead of blaming genetics, they blamed external enemies, bad luck, rebellious subjects, anything except the truth. They believed the solution was more of the same: marry even closer, tighten the circle, keep the power pure. But as we'll soon see, that strategy would transform the Egyptian royal house from the architects of a golden age into a spectacle of royal dysfunction so shocking that it would rival any modern reality show. Because soon, we'll meet Ptolemy IV, the first clear product of generations of incestuous breeding, a pharaoh whose reign begins the visible, irreversible decline of the Ptolemaic dynasty. He's a man who inherits all the wealth and splendor of Egypt's greatest era, yet proves unable to hold it together, succumbing to luxury, fear, and staggering political weakness. And the consequences of his failures won't just shake the royal palace, they'll ripple across the entire Mediterranean, opening Egypt's doors to the rising power of Rome. And that's where the next chapter of this epic descent begins, because the story of the Ptolemies is about to get darker, stranger, and far more dangerous than even the wildest royal scandals you've heard so far. And this brings us to the moment when the glittering facade of the Ptolemaic dynasty finally begins to crack in plain sight, when the dazzling gold of Alexandria starts to tarnish, and the genetic time bomb planted by generations of sibling marriages begins ticking louder than ever. Enter Ptolemy IV, known by history as Ptolemy IV, a ruler whose very existence seems like proof that royal incest, no matter how politically brilliant it might seem at first, cannot defy the laws of nature forever. Picture this man, the descendant of conquerors, draped in purple silk, dripping with gold and incense, reclining on jeweled couches while Egypt teeters on the edge of chaos. He's inherited the most powerful throne in the Mediterranean, a kingdom richer than any other, a navy that once ruled the seas, and a city, Alexandria, that was the intellectual capital of the world. And yet Ptolemy IV seems utterly uninterested in the business of ruling. Instead, he pours his days into endless parties, orgiastic banquets, and personal indulgence, surrounding himself with sycophants and flatterers, while enemies circle like sharks beyond Egypt's borders. Historians call him one of the first true examples of inbreeding depression in the Ptolemaic dynasty, a ruler who possesses neither the charisma of his grandfather, nor the brilliance of Ptolemy the sister-lover, nor the strategic mind of his great ancestors. He's a man adrift in luxury, blinded by pleasure, unable or perhaps unwilling to recognize the storm gathering at his doorstep. And the consequences of his weakness ripple through the kingdom like shockwaves. Because while Ptolemy IV is busy oiling his hair and attending elaborate rituals, Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire sees his chance. He strikes into Egypt's territories in Syria and Palestine, lands the Ptolemies have controlled for generations. The decisive confrontation comes at the Battle of Raphia in 217 BCE. On paper, Egypt should win easily. Ptolemy's army is larger. His war elephants outnumber the enemies. His soldiers are well trained, his treasury overflowing. But numbers mean nothing without leadership. The battle descends into chaos. Orders are garbled units, break formation, and Ptolemy IV, rather than inspiring his troops, nearly flees the battlefield altogether. By sheer luck and the courage of his generals, Egypt ekes out a narrow victory, but it's not the triumph it should have been. The Ptolemaic army is battered, the treasury strained, and Egypt's enemies now know the truth: the dynasty is vulnerable. And the rot doesn't stop there. Back home, Egyptian peasants begin to whisper that their so-called divine rulers have become foreign overlords who care nothing for the native people. Rebellions flare in the Nile Delta. Tax collectors are murdered. Alexandria remains a glittering capital, but beyond its marble walls, the provinces seethe with resentment. Meanwhile, Tommy IV responds to crisis the only way he knows how, with more luxury, more festivals, and more isolation. He turns inward, drowning in pleasure while the empire fractures around him. And this is the true tragedy of Tommy IV's reign. He wasn't merely a weak ruler. He was the living embodiment of a dynasty whose once mighty bloodline was collapsing under the weight of its own genetic baggage and political hubris. And here's the kicker: nobody in the Ptolemaic court blames incest for this downfall. Instead, they blame foreign enemies, fickle gods, and the treachery of subjects. They cling desperately to the same old solution: marry even closer, keep power pure, never realizing that they're tightening a noose around the dynasty's neck. Tommy IV dies relatively young, leaving behind a throne weaker than it has been in over a century. His reign is the turning point, the moment the Ptolemaic dynasty shifts from golden empire to vulnerable state ripe for foreign manipulation. And as we're about to see, that vulnerability opens the door for something even more dangerous than sibling rivalry or genetic collapse: the creeping influence of Rome. Because next comes Tommy V, the child king, a boy who will ascend the throne at 5 years old, thrust into a world of political conspiracies, civil wars, and Roman ambitions that will transform Egypt from a superpower into a puppet. And that's the next chapter of this royal nightmare we're about to unfold. So picture this Egypt, once the richest kingdom on earth, now trembling under the weight of its own royal failures, and into this storm steps a child, a boy, barely 5 years old, crowned pharaoh of a kingdom on the brink of chaos. This is Tommy V, known to historians as Ptolemy V, the so-called Child King, and his rise marks one of the most precarious chapters in the entire Ptolemaic dynasty's twisted saga. Imagine the marble halls of Alexandria echoing with frantic footsteps as courtiers and generals argue over who will control the throne. Outside, the streets buzz with rumor merchants whispering that the boy king is too young to rule, that Egypt is vulnerable, that perhaps the gods have finally abandoned the royal house that dares marry brother to sister over and over again. And they're not entirely wrong, because the dynasty is bleeding power from every wound inflicted by generations of incest and political tunnel vision. While Tommy V clutches his tiny scepter, foreign enemies gather like vultures. The Seleucid Empire under the relentless Antiochus III continues pressing into Egyptian territories. Rebellions erupt across the Nile Delta as native Egyptians grow tired of being ruled by what they now see as a foreign insular elite. But the real specter looming over Egypt isn't merely internal rebellion or Eastern invaders, it's Rome. Because while Egypt collapses inward, Rome rises outward, its influence expanding like a tidal wave across the Mediterranean. And here's the genius and the tragedy of Rome: they don't need to conquer Egypt outright, at least not yet. All they have to do is wait, offer help when it suits them, and slowly wrap the coils of political influence tighter around Alexandria's marble pillars. During Tommy V's reign, the first tendrils of Roman intervention begin creeping into Egypt's affairs. Roman merchants flood Alexandria's bustling ports, their silver coins jingling as they buy Egyptian grain to feed Rome's exploding population. Roman diplomats appear in court, offering military support against Antiochus in exchange for subtle concessions, trade privileges, political favors, whispers of future alliances. To the desperate Regency Council struggling to rule on behalf of the child king, Rome seems like a savior, but it's a devil's bargain. Because every favor comes with strings attached, every loan comes with hidden costs, every Roman legion that steps onto Egyptian soil plants a seed of foreign dominion. Meanwhile, Tommy V is growing up in a palace seething with conspiracies. Regents jockey for power-poisoning rivals, forging alliances, manipulating the young pharaoh like a puppet on golden strings. The great library of Alexandria. Once the pride of the Mediterranean begins to lose scholars as intellectuals flee the kingdom's turmoil, the economy staggers under crushing taxes and rebellion. And the terrifying thing is, the people in power still believe the solution lies in the same old formula: keep power within the family, marry closer, preserve the royal bloodline. But the evidence all around them screams that this strategy has failed. Egypt is no longer an independent superpower. It's becoming a client state, a wealthy but fragile jewel, dangling from Rome's tightening grasp. Tommy V, despite flashes of personal competence as he matures, can't escape the legacy of a dynasty built on genetic gamble and political paranoia. And when he dies, some whisper of poison. Others blame the ravages of genetic frailty. He leaves Egypt in an even weaker position than when he took the throne. His reign sets in motion a permanent shift in Egypt's destiny, transforming it from master of its fate to a pawn in Rome's grand imperial chessboard. And here's where the next chapter of this story plunges into truly unhinged territory. Because after Tommy V, the Ptolemies descend into a carnival of chaos so twisted, it makes everything you've heard so far look tame by comparison. Civil war explodes like wildfire. Mothers declare war on their own. Daughters, brothers slaughter brothers, and incest reaches levels that would make even ancient audiences gasp. And as Rome watches from the sidelines calculating every move, the dynasty that once ruled the world's richest kingdom begins devouring itself from within. So buckle up, because next we're entering the most scandalous, psychologically disturbing chapter in royal history, a chapter where the Ptolemies will prove that the only thing more dangerous than marrying your sister is replacing her with your niece. And just when you think the Ptolemaic dynasty couldn't possibly get any more twisted, here comes the man who might just be the most dysfunctional ruler in the entire sordid saga, Tommy the Greedy Man. Remember everything we've learned so far about sibling marriage, power consolidation, and the genetic time bomb ticking under Egypt's golden throne? Well, Tommy the Greedy Man takes all of that and cranks it to a level so extreme it makes modern soap operas look like polite dinner conversation. Picture Alexandria. At this point, once the crown jewel of the ancient world, now a city trembling under the weight of political conspiracies and public disgust. Marble statues still glitter in the sun, the harbor still hums with trade. But behind palace doors, the royal family has become a vortex of incest, betrayal, and bloodshed. Enter Tommy the Greedy Man, a Ptolemaic king who marries his own sister Cleopatra the mother. That alone would be shocking enough for any dynasty. But he's not finished. Because then, after producing a daughter with Cleopatra the mother, he decides to divorce his sister wife and marry his own niece Cleopatra the daughter. Let that sink in for a second. He replaces his sister with his sister's daughter, creating a family tree so tangled it practically grows in circles. This wasn't just incest. It was incest layered upon incest, creating royal relationships that defy logic, morality, and even basic human decency. Cleopatra the mother naturally doesn't take kindly to being dumped for her own daughter, and so begins one of the most scandalous civil wars in all of ancient history, a mother declaring open warfare against her daughter, both of them fighting for the same throne, the same man, and the same claim to divine rulership of Egypt. Imagine the chaos palace guards switching loyalties, daily generals, picking sides not based on politics, but on which queen they think might survive the week, and Alexandria's streets running red with blood as factions clash for control. The great library of Alexandria, once the beacon of global knowledge, burns repeatedly during the fighting. Scholars flee, merchants avoid the ports. The economy crumbles as the city that once symbolized civilization itself descends into barbaric, factional violence. And at the center of it all stands Tommy the Greedy Man, flip-flopping between mother and daughter, depending on who holds the upper hand in any given moment. One week, he's backing Cleopatra the mother, praising her divine wisdom. The next, he's appearing in public with Cleopatra the daughter, proclaiming her his true queen. The instability is devastating. Egypt, once the richest kingdom in the ancient world, becomes an international cautionary tale, a kingdom devouring itself from within. And here's what's even more horrifying: even as Egypt burns, both factions continue the practice of sibling marriage. Cleopatra the mother arranges for her son from a previous marriage to marry his own sister. Cleopatra the daughter plans to marry her own son to her daughter. Incest has become so normalized that even in the middle of civil war, nobody can imagine any other way to secure the throne. Meanwhile, Rome watches from the sidelines with growing amusement and ruthless calculation. Roman senators receive reports so outrageous they might as well be reading fiction: a pharaoh marrying his niece, a mother and daughter at war over the same man, 3 simultaneous claims to the throne. Rome realizes it doesn't need to conquer Egypt directly. All they have to do is wait. Let the Ptolemies destroy themselves and then swoop in to collect the pieces. By the end of this brutal civil war, whoever wins will rule over ruins. The economy is shattered, the population decimated, and Egypt's once mighty prestige reduced to ash. The Ptolemaic dynasty is no longer a superpower, it's a dysfunctional client state, staggering under the weight of its own madness. And here's the plot twist. The dynasty's story isn't over yet. Because out of this blood-soaked chaos, one figure will emerge, a woman whose name will echo across millennia, whose intelligence, charisma, and sheer force of will almost managed to save the Ptolemaic kingdom from oblivion. Her name is Cleopatra, and she's about to take center stage in the final act of this jaw-dropping royal drama. And so, from the ashes of one of the most catastrophic royal civil wars in human history, a new figure emerges, a woman whose name will become synonymous with beauty, power, and irresistible charisma. Her name is Cleopatra. But here's the truth that history often glosses over. Cleopatra wasn't merely a seductress draped in silk, or a femme fatale who brought mighty men to their knees. She was the product of 250 years of systematic incest, political paranoia, and dynastic chaos. And yet somehow, against all odds, she became one of the most formidable rulers the ancient world ever witnessed. Picture the scene, it's 51 BCE, and Cleopatra ascends the throne at just 18 years old. Her kingdom is battered, her dynasty in ruins, and Rome's shadow looms larger every day over Egypt's golden temples. And to make matters even more insane, she's expected to rule alongside her own little brother Tommy the XIII, who's barely 10 years old. Think about the irony here. The most famous queen in human history starts her reign married to a child sibling. But from the very beginning, Cleopatra shows she's nothing like the weak, decadent Ptolemies who came before her. She does something no ruler in her family has bothered to do for centuries. She actually learns the Egyptian language. This isn't just symbolic, it's revolutionary. For the first time in 300 years, a Ptolemaic monarch can speak directly to Egyptian priests, peasants, merchants, and soldiers in their own tongue. She bridges the chasm between foreign overlord and native ruler, earning genuine loyalty from a population that had grown weary of Greek-speaking pharaohs. But Cleopatra's genius doesn't stop there. While her predecessors obsessed over palace intrigues and incestuous alliances, she keeps her eyes fixed on the broader chessboard of global power. She understands that Egypt's only hope of survival lies not in isolation, but in forging alliances with the rising Roman superpower. Enter Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, embroiled in his own civil war and suddenly arriving in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival Pompey. While chaos swirls around the palace, Cleopatra makes her boldest move yet. According to legend, she's smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled inside a carpet, emerging like a living miracle to plead her case. Whether the carpet story is true or not, one thing is certain. Cleopatra knew how to craft spectacle and seize opportunity. Her alliance with Caesar isn't just romantic, it's pure strategic brilliance. With Caesar's backing, she eliminates her brother. Rival consolidates power and ensures Egypt's continued independence. For now, she even bears Caesar a child, Caesarion, who embodies her vision of a hybrid dynasty, a fusion of Egyptian and Roman bloodlines that might have changed the future of the entire Mediterranean world. But then, Caesar is assassinated in 44 BCE, and Cleopatra faces her next great test. Enter Mark Antony, Rome's brilliant general and Caesar's loyal ally, now one of the key players in the deadly struggle for control of Rome. Cleopatra recognizes that Antony holds the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean, and once again she makes her move. Together they envision a new Hellenistic empire stretching from Greece to India, combining Roman military might, Egyptian wealth, and Greek culture. For nearly a decade, Cleopatra and Antony rule as partners, lovers, and political titans. They present themselves to the world as living gods, Isis and Dionysus reborn, while Rome watches in growing alarm. And at the center of this drama stands Cleopatra, dazzling audiences with her intelligence, multilingual eloquence, and ruthless political savvy. But lurking on the horizon is Octavian Caesar's adopted son, determined to destroy any rival to his claim as the master of Rome. And the clash that's coming won't just decide Cleopatra's fate, it will determine whether Egypt remains a kingdom or becomes nothing more than a Roman province. Because what happens next will culminate in one of the most famous battles in human history, the Battle of Actium, a confrontation that will either secure Cleopatra's vision of a new empire or consign the last Ptolemaic queen to tragedy. And as we're about to see, even Cleopatra's brilliance might not be enough to overcome the final tidal wave of Roman ambition and the centuries of dysfunction buried in her royal bloodline. And so we arrive at the final act of this breathtaking historical saga, the moment when one woman's brilliance and charisma collide with the unstoppable machinery of an empire. The year is 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Mark Antony face Octavian, the future Augustus Caesar, in the decisive showdown that will seal the fate not just of Egypt, but of the entire Mediterranean world. Picture the scene: the sun blazing over the glittering waters of the Ionian Sea sails, snapping in the wind warships bristling with bronze rams, and soldiers beating drums that echo like thunder across the waves. This is the Battle of Actium, the moment Cleopatra's dream of a hybrid Hellenistic empire either lives or dies. But here's the brutal truth: as powerful and resourceful as Cleopatra is, she's up against Octavian, a man who doesn't merely fight battles, he rewrites history itself. Octavian spins propaganda painting Cleopatra as a scheming temptress who seduced Rome's noble generals, a foreign queen corrupting Roman virtue. And the Roman public swallows the story whole, hungry for a villain to blame. On the day of Actium, chaos erupts. The battle is fierce, the winds unpredictable. Cleopatra and Antony's fleets falter under relentless Roman assault. And in a decision that has echoed through 2,000 years of history, Cleopatra flees the battlefield, her ships cutting away from the flames, pulling Antony with her. Whether it was a pre-planned escape or sheer panic, it doesn't matter. The result is the same: Octavian triumphs, and Egypt's independence dies that day in the surf and smoke of Actium's waves. But Cleopatra doesn't surrender. Even as Octavian's legions march into Egypt, she makes her final legendary stand. She locks herself inside her palace, barricades the gates, and gathers what's left of her loyal forces. When Octavian offers to parade her through Rome as a living trophy, she refuses to be humiliated. Instead, on August 30th, 30 BCE, Cleopatra chooses death on her own terms. Legend says she arranges her royal robes, crowns herself like Isis one final time, and uses an asp's venom to slip away from a world that has turned against her. Her death marks the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line that began with Alexander's trusted general stealing a corpse and built an empire on sibling marriages, political brilliance, and cultural fusion. Egypt becomes a Roman province, its glittering palaces now under the watchful eyes of Roman governors. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, and the last hope for a hybrid dynasty, is hunted down and killed. Her other children are taken to Rome, paraded as trophies, and the Library of Alexandria begins its slow, tragic decline. But here's what's extraordinary. Despite being the final chapter of a dynasty built on incest and scandal, Cleopatra herself proves that greatness isn't purely genetic. She's living proof that intelligence, adaptability, and strategic vision can rise above even the most dysfunctional bloodline. She spoke 9 languages, commanded armies, negotiated with the most powerful men in history, and nearly kept Egypt independent for another generation. And that brings us to the real lesson in this saga, a lesson that's as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago, because the story of the Ptolemaic dynasty isn't just about Egyptian incest or royal scandals. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when people, families, or entire empires become so isolated, so obsessed with purity and control, that they stop adapting to a changing world. While the Ptolemies kept marrying closer and closer, Rome was doing the opposite, absorbing diverse cultures, talents, and ideas, growing stronger through inclusion rather than exclusion. That's why Rome won and Egypt fell, and the parallels to our own world are impossible to ignore. Corporations run by a single family who only promote their own. Political dynasties trapped in echo chambers. Social groups afraid to let in new ideas. The lesson is crystal clear. Real power comes from diversity, from adaptability, from learning and evolving, not from clinging desperately to the illusion of purity. Cleopatra almost changed that story. Almost. But she was born too late into a dynasty that had already sown the seeds of its own destruction. And that's the tragic brilliance of her legacy, a final shining example that even in the most dysfunctional systems, extraordinary individuals can rise up and try to turn the tide. So here's my question for you. If Cleopatra had won at Actium, would we remember the Ptolemies as decadent failures, or as the architects of a multicultural empire that could have changed the world? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you love these deep dives into the dark corridors of history, hit that subscribe button, because the next story I've got for you might be even wilder than Egyptian incest and the fall of Cleopatra's dynasty. So let's step back and look at the entire sweep of this jaw-dropping story, the rise and fall of a dynasty that began with one brilliant power grab and ended in scandal, civil war, and the collapse of a kingdom that had once been the richest, most dazzling realm on earth. Think about how it started one man, Ptolemy I, understanding that you don't need the whole empire to rule the world. You just need the richest, most defensible piece of it. Egypt, the Nile, Alexandria, a hybrid kingdom fusing Greek brilliance with Egyptian majesty. And for a time, it worked spectacularly. The Ptolemaic dynasty became the shining jewel of the Mediterranean, building wonders like the Library of Alexandria, amassing wealth beyond imagination, and shaping the cultural and scientific future of humanity. But lurking beneath all that gold and marble was a fatal flaw, an obsession with keeping power locked inside the family. A belief that purity equals strength, that isolation is the key to survival. And so, sibling married, sibling uncles, married nieces, brothers, married sisters. At first, it seemed like genius. Ptolemy the sister lover and Arsinoe II created the dynasty's golden age. But with every new royal child born of those same reshuffled genes, the dynasty's fate grew more fragile, its future more uncertain. By the time Ptolemy the weakling and Ptolemy the child king took the throne, Egypt wasn't a superpower anymore. It was a glittering stage for some of the most twisted royal scandals in human history. A mother went to war with her own daughter over the same husband. A man married his niece after divorcing her mother. The great library burned as civil war tore Alexandria apart. And lurking in the shadows, waiting patiently, was Rome. Because while the Ptolemies were busy marrying each other and fighting family feuds, Rome was building an empire not on purity, but on inclusion. They absorbed cultures, talents, and ideas. They made conquered peoples into citizens. And that flexibility made Rome unstoppable. By the time Cleopatra took power, the window for Egyptian independence was almost closed. She was brilliant, charismatic, a master strategist who spoke 9 languages and could hold her own against the most powerful men in history. She almost reversed her dynasty's fate. Almost. But centuries of incest, isolation, and political dysfunction were stacked against her. And so when Octavian defeated Cleopatra and Mark Antony at Actium, it wasn't just the end of a dynasty, it was the end of an entire way of thinking about power. And that brings us to the question that echoes far beyond ancient Egypt. Because the story of the Ptolemies isn't just about Egyptian incest or royal gossip, it's about human nature, about the way power isolates people, about how dynasties, corporations, governments, even families can become echo chambers, blind to change, terrified of letting in fresh blood or new ideas. It's happening today. Think about corporations run like family empires hiring only insiders, political dynasties trapped in the same cycle of old names and old alliances, tech giants creating exclusive bubbles shielded from criticism, convinced of their own invincibility. The Ptolemies thought they were protecting their legacy. In reality, they were digging their own grave. They mistook purity for power, tradition for wisdom, and isolation for security. And it cost them everything. So ask yourself, in your own world, your own workplace, your own community, are you seeing the same patterns? Are the people in charge inviting new ideas or shutting them out? Are they adapting or hiding behind old walls? Because history's harshest lesson is that survival doesn't belong to the pure. It belongs to those who can change. Cleopatra tried to change the destiny of her family, but she was born too late into a dynasty that had already doomed itself. Her story is tragic, yes, but it's also a warning, a reminder that the walls we build to keep our power safe can become the very prisons that destroy us. So what do you think? If Cleopatra had defeated Octavian at Actium, would the Ptolemaic dynasty have transformed the ancient world into a multicultural super empire blending Egyptian wealth with Roman might and Greek culture? Or was their fate sealed from the moment Tommy I decided that power should stay locked inside the family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're as fascinated as I am by how ancient power struggles mirror the modern world, make sure you smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because next time we're diving into another true story of royal scandals, political plots, and the dark side of human ambition. And trust me, it's even crazier than Egyptian incest. So here we stand looking back across 3 centuries of glory, genius, and grotesque dysfunction, at a dynasty that rose higher than almost any in human history, only to implode under the weight of its own walls. Let's remember what we've witnessed together. We watched Tommy I steal the corpse of the greatest conqueror who ever lived and turn Egypt into a kingdom so dazzling it eclipsed every rival. We saw Alexandria become the Manhattan of the ancient world, a city pulsing with knowledge, art, and unimaginable wealth. We followed brilliant minds like Tommy the Sister Lover and Arsinoe II as they built a golden age through daring political experiments. But we also traced how the very formula that gave the Ptolemies power, Egyptian incest, royal isolation, keeping everything in the family, became the ticking genetic time bomb that destroyed them from the inside out. We saw how each new generation of kings and queens grew a little weaker, a little more decadent, until Egypt was ruled by pharaohs obsessed with luxury and blinded by paranoia. We watched in horror as Tommy the greedy man replaced his sister wife with her own daughter, triggering a civil war so depraved that mother and daughter literally went to war over the same throne and the same man. We saw the great library burn, scholars flee, and Alexandria's once great harbor become a symbol of shattered dreams. And through it all, the rising power of Rome waited patiently, knowing that it didn't need to conquer Egypt outright. It only had to let the Ptolemies destroy themselves. And in Cleopatra, we witnessed a final spark of brilliance, a queen who tried to break free of her dynasty's fatal patterns, who learned languages, forged alliances, and nearly bent Rome to her will. She almost rewrote the end of the story. Almost. But the tide of history was already flowing in one direction, and Cleopatra's defeat marked not only the fall of Egypt's last pharaoh, but the end of an entire era of ancient empires built on bloodlines and absolute rule. Yet here's why this story matters so much even now, 2,000 years later. The tragedy of the Ptolemies isn't just about royal gossip, incest, or glittering palaces. It's a mirror reflecting the darkest patterns of human ambition, because the same forces that consumed the Ptolemaic dynasty are alive and well today. We see it in corporate dynasties that hire only insiders and political families, trapped in endless loops of old alliances and rivalries in social circles, terrified of new ideas that might threaten the comfort of the familiar. The Ptolemies believed purity was strength. They believed isolation was safety. They believed tradition was wisdom. But history shows us the truth. The walls we build to protect ourselves can become the cages that destroy us. And that's the real lesson Cleopatra and her entire blood-soaked dynasty left behind. The question is, will we listen? Or will we keep repeating the same fatal patterns under new names and modern headlines? So I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Do you think Cleopatra, with just a few more years, could have flipped the script and built a multicultural empire powerful enough to rival Rome? Or was the fate of the Ptolemaic dynasty sealed from the moment they decided to marry brother to sister in the name of power? And if you've enjoyed this wild ride through one of history's most jaw-dropping dynasties, smash that subscribe button, because trust me, there's so much more coming. Next time we're diving into the secrets of another empire that tried to defy the laws of human nature and paid the ultimate price. A story of emperors who declared themselves living gods of betrayals that rewrote entire civilizations, and of how even the mightiest can fall when they forget that power in the end always comes at a price. Thanks for watching, and remember, history isn't just about the past. It's the ultimate playbook for the future. Stay curious, stay questioning, and never stop asking who's really pulling the strings behind the thrones of power. So here's the truth. History screams at us no matter how many centuries pass. Power built on isolation always collapses. The Ptolemies thought marrying their siblings would protect them from threats, but it became the prison that destroyed them. The lesson for us today: when we lock ourselves away, whether in families, businesses, nations, or ideas, we don't keep danger out. We keep growth out. We keep life out. And eventually, like the dynasties of old, we suffocate under the weight of our own walls. But here's the sharpest edge of this story: you don't have to repeat their mistake. Adapt. Question everything. Invite new ideas. Because survival belongs not to the pure or the isolated, but to those brave enough to change. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Cleopatra could have rewritten history if she'd had just a little more time? Or was her fate sealed by centuries of secrets and bloodlines? And if you felt your mind sparked by the hidden patterns of power in this story, hit that like button, save this video, and smash that subscribe, because the next episode is going to reveal secrets even wilder than Egyptian incest. Don't just watch history. Become someone who sees the patterns shaping our world right now. Let's explore them together.